Mama, I have some bad news. I'm in love with a criminal. I'm just joking. Here are some horrible people throughout history like this guy. Ignasio Del Rio was sent to trial for one thing: cat burglary. Yes, this young man was doing Catch Me If You Can in real life, and maybe even a mix of Aladdin and James Bond level of thievery. Maybe it wasn't that bad. But he originally came from Brazil, where he wanted to pursue his dream of being a martial artist in the United States. When the opportunities fell through, he found himself engaging in gangs in order to, help support himself financially. However, he didn't like how the gangs operated, as they mainly targeted old people, elderly and hardworking individuals who just couldn't afford to lose their belongings. So Del Rio branched off on his own to target the bigger fish, rich people, and their mansions. He was being nicknamed the James Bond of cat burglaries due to his sophisticated tools and techniques. After all, he was responsible for over 1,000 burglaries all over the state of California. In doing so, it marked him as one of the most notorious and prolific cat burglars in US history. He stole more than $18 million worth of jewelry and art. After finding the defendant was cooperating with the police in recovering stolen property, the trial court denied probation and sentenced the defendant in a total of 7 years and 4 months in state prison. He even had a tutorial video for people on how he would get into these properties. And no, not for the average person like you and me, but he surprised the public and achieved notoriety after he agreed to teach law enforcement agencies techniques in a 70-minute training video. Even after helping the authorities, he even drew a map from his prison cell that would lead authorities to a buried treasure in the San Fernando Valley in California, which contained millions of dollars in jewelry. Although he was trained in high-risk sports like martial arts, kickboxing, motorcycle riding, climbing, and more, he never actually used his knowledge in a form of aggression, but only used it as an act of self-defense. When detectives did research and investigated his background, they understood with his ability to focus on using his natural skills and intelligence, he managed to succeed in each burglary he committed. The FBI was only able to pursue him when they accidentally came across a storage facility that had over millions of dollars in jewelry and art within. Even a Degas painting worth than $10 million was within that storage, as well as an arsenal of weapons. However, the weapons was Del Rio's downfall. As they were submitted to the bureau, they were actually registered and taken from, they found out where the source was. And either way, because he was able to cooperate with the FBI in training and provide them maps of other loot, his 7 years and 4 months criminal penalty was sort of the 1/3 of his original sentence. And since this was around 2006, technically he's out now doing his thing. Al Capone made millions of dollars selling illegal liquor, and he loved fame, and he sought out reporters and boasted about his exploits. Everyone knew about Al Capone, as he was making $60 million a year. He wore a double-breasted suits and flashed a diamond ring the size of a golf ball, and he drove a 1928 Cadillac Town sedan protected with 1,360 kilograms of steel armor and bulletproof windows. Many people saw him as a hero, as he reminded them of Robin Hood, who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Capone cultivated his reputation as he would donate his crime money to charity and once opened a soup kitchen in Chicago. Government officials suspected Capone was hiring hitmen to kill his enemies. On February 14, 1929, 7 members of Bugs Malone's gang were lured into a garage in Chicago. When they arrived, several men disguised as police gunned them down. This became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Unable to prove more serious charges, the authorities finally arrested him on tax evasions and sent him to Atlanta Penitentiary. In Atlanta, Capone successfully bribed the guards and public officials and received special treatment. Once at Alcatraz, Al Capone was no longer famous. He received no special treatment anymore, and he played banjo on the Rock Islander band and gave regular Sunday concerts. When he worked in the laundry room in the library, he said Alcatraz had got me licked. Bill Mason is another infamous criminal who might intrigue you. When it came to cat burglary, it's only under the guise of a woman dressed as a cat or a snazzy duo with eye mask and a turtleneck ensemble. But Bill Mason was one of the few burglars who wrote a book about how he did it. The infamous jewel thief, notably the author of Confessions of Master Jewel Thief, in a book of which he describes is one of his most memorable heists, mentioned how he targeted celebrities in their apartments in Florida during the 1970s and 1980s. Victims include Johnny Wilsmiller, Bob Hope, and Phyllis Diller. Eventually, Mason collected a haul of jewelry worth $35 million, and the bulk of his criminal riches were confiscated after his numerous short jail sentences. Although he is suspected to still have earned a significant amount of money in unsolved burglaries attributed to him, his heists were extremely dangerous, not just because of the guards or the, system, but how he had to climb these high-story buildings by utilizing his talent. During the nighttime burglary at the apartment of Armin Schfer, he scaled a 15-story building during a storm, and he would plan a burglary extremely carefully, researching any possible security systems that he could possibly, thwart him. But before finding any ways to overcome them, in his book, he attributed his success to the errors of his victims, such as accidentally leaving the door open or unsafe lock, and was basically a very serious case for Bob Hope as his safe was unlocked. He also tricked realtors into telling them about everything about the security measures of his targets by posing as a potential buyer for a nearby apartment. Mason once stole an Olympic gold medal belonging to Johnny Wilsmiller, although he mailed it back to him after months of his theft because he felt guilty stealing something with such sentimental value. So, some good morals there. George Machine Gun Kelly came from a wealthy family in Tennessee and attended in college. While many people believed his wife Catherine pushed him into a life of crime, before meeting Catherine, he had minor skirmishes with the law. She actually brought him a machine pew-pew weapon and introduced him to a notorious gang. After their marriage marriage, he became public enemy number one. Kelly had robbed banks, and FBI's wanted posters described him as an expert machine gunner. And after kidnapping a wealthy oil tycoon, he was actually sent to Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. After he boasted that he would break himself and his wife out of prison in time for Christmas, authorities took him very seriously and actually shipped him to Alcatraz. On the Rock, he was considered a model prisoner. Although Kelly was known for bragging about his crimes he didn't commit, he did serve his time quietly without conflicts in solitary, as he served as an altar boy in the prison chapel and actually worked in the laundry room. Jack McLean had never called himself a super thief. That was an appellation by the cops and robbers that used to define of this legend as they knew so little about. Before his eventual arrest and incarceration, McLean actually stole over $133 million worth of jewelry and thousands of burglaries in Florida during the 1970s and 80s. His life of crime made him so wealthy that when police caught him, well, he actually owned a multi-million-dollar mansion, a huge 300-seat helicopter, and a $40,000 speedboat. McLean is widely accepted as one of the most intelligent burglars ever to be arrested, with a genius-level IQ and extremely vast knowledge of alarm systems and electronics in general. McLean would always carry a police scanner with him on heist, like a little Batman, in order to stay aware of the 911 calls and keep track of any nearby police cruisers. His trademark was to never inflict damage on the property that he burglarized. Instead, he would actually resort to non-violent methods of gaining entry, such as lockpicking. As a result, his high-value items that he'd have stolen seemed to simply vanish from the people's homes, resulting in many of the victims just suspecting other family members for theft, or just assuming they misplaced their items. He would always carry a change of clothes with him in order to appear inconspicuous if seen nearby the scene of the crime. McLean usually disabled alarm systems and then reset them before he exited, though if the alarm was pretty new to him, he would carefully cut it from the wall to study it later. That's actually pretty smart, but don't do that. He would often leave sarcastic notes at the crime of the scene. For example, he once robbed a mansion adjacent to the police chief's house and left a note on the police officer's car that said, "Glad to see you're doing your job." Very sarcastic and kind of like a Bugs Bunny kind of trope. McLean's downfall then came when he actually broke one of his own rules, which is always work alone, and recruited an accomplice to help him on a particularly profitable burglary. The accomplice was arrested after he tried selling off the burglary takings on one of the markets, well, open market, thus attracting unwanted attention. German serial killer Ignasio Schfer met a strange end in 2018 when he ended his own life, quote unquote, in his prison cell, most likely accidentally, by tying an electric cable around his private parts and giving himself a fatal shock. Schiffer's name is unlikely to ring a bell with many people, as he is dubbed the Aachen Strangler, as he was imprisoned in 2008 for 5 killings committed in the 1980s, mainly young adolescents. He targeted these young girls at nightclubs and discotheques, where he would continue to do these sprees in a span of 5 to 10 years. In March 2007, Ignasio Schfer was actually caught and arrested in Heinsberg trying to steal scrap metal. He voluntarily gave a saliva sample, which resulted in him being exposed as the perpetrator of the 5 killings. As he was arrested on 23rd of August for these crimes, during the confession he actually confessed to the 5 deaths, but he recanted his confessions before the district court on the grounds that he had a sadomasochistic tendency. He only admitted to the crimes because the thought of a pretrial detention and punishment had aroused him. Schfer also alleged that he was forced to confess, and that's another way to say that you confessed something. But in the morning of the day of his death, on July 2018, guards of the prison where he was staying and serving a life sentence arrived to find him dead, after seemingly killing himself in the middle of an intimate act. Schfer had ripped out the cable from a lamp, tied it around his private parts, and tried to stick the other end in a socket to give himself a thing, and the electric shock passed through his body and caused his heart failure, and the death is considered accidental, and the police said that there was no signs of foul play, but according to his lawyer, says that his client was not doing it to himself. One of the most legendary figures in the American Old West is Jesse James. Jesse James was also known as a notorious train robber, and he and the other members of his James Younger gang weren't above killing anybody who got in their way. Over their career, James and his gang were believed to have stolen approximately $200,000, but were nevertheless admired in their home state of Missouri, mostly because of their support of the Confederacy during the American Civil War. James' status as a folk hero was officially cemented when fellow gang member Robert Ford had shot him in the back. Popular portrayal of James as an embodiment of Robin Hood, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, as a case of romantic revisionism, as there are actually no evidence of his gang actually sharing any of their loot of their robberies with anyone outside of their network. The death of Jesse James became a national sensation, and the Fords made no attempt to hide their role. Robert Ford, the one who shot Jesse, ordered the governor to claim his reward, but the crowds pressed into the little houses of St. Joseph to see the real dead bandit. The Ford brothers actually just surrendered to the authorities and were dismayed to be charged with the first degree. Speaking of brothers, when the Anglin brothers turned to crime, they tried to not hurt anybody, and when they robbed a business, they chose a time when the business was closed so that no one would get hurt. They robbed banks with only a toy gun, and in 1958 they actually robbed the Columbia Savings Bank in Alabama. After getting caught, John tried to escape the state penitentiary and got shipped to Alcatraz. After his own escape attempt, Clarence joined his brother at Alcatraz on the night of June 11th. John Morris and the Anglin brothers escaped Alcatraz as they had planned planned their escapes for 9 months. Every night of the 5 months, they actually discarded saw blades and smuggled cafeteria spoons to bury into the rotting cement at the back of their cell. They would work from 5:30 p.m. when they entered the cell until 9 p.m., not long before the lights out. They used fake vents to conceal their work from the guards. Meanwhile, they stole 50 raincoats to build a raft. They sewed the raincoats together and sealed them with the heat of the steam pipes below their cells, and they planned to paddle to nearby Angel Island, stealing a boat and then boosting a car. On June 11th, 1962, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers crawled out of the back of their cells, gathered the raft, and carried it up to the roof. Then they climbed down the wall into the bay, and that was the last time anyone saw these 3 men. When the guards got no answer during the morning wake-up call, they pulled back the sheets to discover decoys. It is unlikely, though, that the men survived. After all, the temperature of the water is 12 degrees Celsius, and the tide was 13 kilometers per hour. Pieces of the men's raft was found in the bay, and no boats or cars were reported stolen, and urban legend says that their survival continues to this day. Pablo Escobar was the leader of the Colombian cartel that dominated the legal substance world trade with the US. The Netflix series Narcos detailed his influence and the unlimited cash that corrupted society institutions, as well as the lack of will of law enforcement to stop him. Complicated attempts to apprehend him were his effects at funding facilities and donating food to the poor in the Colombian city of Medellin, which made him popular with the downtrodden. Escobar's reign as the world-leading cartel czar was brutal, as he killed hundreds of rivals, law enforcement officers, politicians who opposed him, as well as innocent bystanders. He also has a lot of blood on his hands for the number of people who overdosed on the narcotics he trafficked, as Escobar spent 7 years as a fugitive, but his concern was less about the Colombian justice system than the United States Enforcement Administration. In December 1993, the CNP killed Escobar in a firefight at a private residence in downtown Medellin, and Escobar's death, along with the surrender and the rest of the Ochoa brothers, marked the decline of the Medellin cartel. And finally, Ted Cruz. I'm just joking, not Ted Cruz, the Zodiac Killer. If you remember in pop culture, there were so many questions on who the Zodiac Killer was, especially with Gen Z millennial humor. How this man ate my son memes featured Ted Cruz, as well as how he would be the Zodiac Killer. But is the real Zodiac Killer him or somebody else? It's still unknown, as the infamous Zodiac Killer is still a mystery. The Zodiac Killer was and still an unidentified serial killer who instilled fear throughout the Northern California in the late 1960s and early 70s. Zodiac sent letters where taunted the police and the media, claiming to have killed 37 people, with only 5 of the killings being confirmed. The killer wrote some letters to the police in code, including bloody bits of clothing to use as proof of the criminal deeds, and in 2020, the trio of the code breakers claimed to have broken one of the ciphers, but the killer's identity still remains a mystery. The Zodiac Killer has inspired actually a lot of books and a lot of films, and was a model for the serial killer in the Clint Eastwood movie Dirty Harry, which is overall an interesting addition to history. And speaking of history, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best. Bye!